Welcome back, everybody. Good to see you all back here, all 41 of you so far. Hopefully there'll be a few more join us. What a great afternoon so far. So thank you all for joining us, and welcome to Bystander Innovation, the Basics. This session is sponsored by UBCP ACTRA, and we just want to remind everybody this is being recorded for posterity's sake. We'll share it later. I'm so happy to welcome Stacey Forrester back. She's from Good Night Out, and she's been a huge supporter of ours for a long time and been part of the conference. How many times now? This is your fourth time or fifth time? Always delighted to have you back. So welcome, please, from Good Night Out, Stacey Forrester. Thanks for joining us again.
Thank you for having me. I think we've been at every one, like, since the beginning, which is super exciting.
Absolutely.
Great. I am just, can I get a thumbs up that you can see my slides? Awesome. Great.
We got you.
All right, so let's get going. We don't have a lot of time together, so you're in the right place, the basics of bystander intervention. As we get started and as we come together in the digital world, I do want to acknowledge that I am logging on from occupied Hupechesat territory, which is colonially referred to as Port Alberni, which is my hometown and where a lot of my inspiration and passion for this conversation really was born out of. I do also want to acknowledge, it is not lost on me, the irony of hosting a session on bystander intervention, as all of us today are in the position of feeling like very disempowered bystanders to what is happening in the Ukraine. So I just thank you for showing up in whatever way you are today, and I really appreciate you being here. A little bit about me before we get going. As mentioned, my name is Stacey Forster. I use she, her pronouns. I am a part of a project called Good Night Out, which I will tell you about in a minute. I am also a part of a project called Bass Coast. It's a music festival held here in BC. And every year for the past 9 years, I've run the harm reduction program and been able to collaborate with a team of over 100 volunteers on event safety. And I'm very much looking forward to reuniting with that team this summer. I am also a part of a project called 4 O'Clock Consulting, which provides sort of occupational health and safety, but from a social justice lens, consulting to the music industry in general. I am a nurse by trade. I also hold a degree in gender, race, and social justice. I am now work in the capacity as an urban planner. I love music festivals, and I host a radio show all about music festival harm reduction, which is called The Sanctuary. You can find us on Instagram or the SoundCloud account for Bass Coast. But that is way enough about me. Let's maybe get into some content for today. So like I said, we don't have a lot of time together. So some goals I've set for us is that we're going to review some barriers to bystander intervention. We're going to discuss the rationale for intervening. It might not be what you think it is. I'm going to try and get through 7 ways to have an impact when you witness harassment. We'll review some do's and don'ts. And then I'll talk a little bit about how Good Night Out specifically can help you create a safer event or a safer workplace. I will remind you both the chat and the Q&A are in there for you to ask questions or chime in. I really want to treat this as if we were in the same room together, which hopefully we will be soon. So about Good Night Out, we are a BC-based nonprofit society governed by a board of directors. We kind of have 4 buckets of work. Our first one is the Granville Street team, which just restarted last weekend. So for those of you who are based out of Vancouver, we have an outreach team in the Granville Entertainment District that works midnight to 4 a.m. on the weekends, giving out water, snacks, doing bystander intervention, and kind of helping it be a little less chaotic, although it is very busy, which is great for the venues up there. We also have an education program. So we have about 5 or 6 different workshops, all about sexual violence prevention training with a specific lens for hospitality and music festivals, social gatherings. All of our workshops are absolutely free for sure until the end of April, and hopefully beyond that if our funding is renewed. We will share links in the chat about how you can learn more about that. We also do on-site at-event support, so bringing consent and sexual violence prevention to particularly music festivals, but also shows. And then we do policy and consulting around helping your event have a really solid plan in place to prevent and respond to sexualized violence. So I'm going to bounce it back to you. I'm going to do this quite a bit through our time together. In your various capacities in the event industry, what type of stuff have you seen happening that might need a bystander to do some intervening? Does anyone want to share before I keep talking? I would love to see some ideas in the chat. You bring so much different experience and perspectives to this conversation. Bullying. Yes, thank you, Dawn. Bullying for sure. Yeah, any sentence that starts with "I'm not a blank," but yep, maybe things that are sort of microaggressions, inappropriate sexualized comments. Yes, for sure. We know that in Vancouver in the last 12 months in particular, there's been a spike in hate crimes, particularly anti-Asian hate crimes. So that's something to be aware of. Cyberstalking. Oh, that's a great one, Dawn. Yep. If you want to keep your job, you won't report that. Yeah, these are all really great, and thank you for being so open and honest. The reality is stuff happens around us all day long. Yep, upset patrons being rude or abusive to event staff, for sure. And for those of you who maybe also work in the service industry, especially over the past 2 years, you've probably seen a lot of incidences where someone could have spoken up. So these are, I mean, we could spend a whole hour talking. Feel free to keep sharing them in the chat, but these are all really great. So who is a bystander? A bystander is absolutely everyone who is in the proximity of something happening, whether it's harassment or, you know, forms of violence. Absolutely everyone is a bystander who witnesses an event. The question becomes, what type of bystander are you going to be? Are you going to be a passive bystander who doesn't do anything? Or are you going to be an active bystander who maybe tries to interrupt or diffuse or support the target in this situation? So let's talk about maybe reasons why people do not intervene. So let's pretend it's a lovely sunny day and you're sitting by the river on your own and no one else is around. And suddenly you hear someone splashing and screaming for help. A person is caught in the current and looks like they are drowning. You are the bystander in this situation and your cell phone doesn't work. What reasons might you not intervene in this situation? Or a person, if you feel like you can't speak from your experience. Definitely. Fearing for your own safety, 100%. Yep. You don't know how to swim. That's another very valid reason. Yep. Can't swim well. You don't know the best way to help. Yep. You don't have the skills. Yes, you freeze. You're not sure what you can do. Yes. Yes, yes, yes. These are all really great reasons why someone might not intervene. And all of this is of course a very kind of dramatic example. These all translate as well to seeing someone being harassed in the workplace or being harassed at a live music event, not having the skill, worried about your own safety. Maybe you're not sure if they're really drowning, not wanting to do it alone. All of these are very, very valid reasons. When it comes to maybe something that's not so dramatic, you know, there might be additional reasons such as, you know, one of the people and it might make it weird, or you're worried about, you know, being that person in the workplace and not wanting to rock the boat or jeopardize your position. Power imbalances, as we see in the chat, those all come into play in a more day-to-day example. So lack of skill, fear of safety, not sure if you're reading it right. Maybe you were taught to mind your own business and not rock the boat. The idea that someone else will, The bystander effect is a very real barrier to intervening. So this is a well-documented psychological phenomenon that states that as individuals, we're way less likely to help someone the more people are present. So if we think of like a music festival setting, the more full that main stage area is, the less likely those individuals are in helping if someone looks in distress. Whereas if we're watching a show and there's only, 5 or 6 other people around and one of them needs help, that compulsion we feel to help is, concentrated on those 4, 5, 6 people rather than diffused across thousands of people. And then there's the idea of cause of their own misfortune. And this plays in as well. If we hold on to views about the world where we believe that a person deserves the harm that is happening to them, that will also pose a barrier. And we might see this a lot with people who are maybe faced with challenges around addiction or homelessness and, feeling less compelled to help them because of our beliefs around their circumstance. So in order for us to be able to intervene, there's actually a series of things that have to happen. All right. So the first thing is we have to notice the event, right? To do something about it, we have to notice it. So in a lot of the settings you folks work in, things like crowds and barriers and light shows and lasers and noise could all be a barrier to us even seeing that something is wrong. The next thing that has to happen is that we have to interpret it as a problem. We have to recognize what we're seeing is unsafe. And our own individual biases and privileges and perhaps stereotypes that we hold could be a barrier here. The next thing that has to happen is we have to feel responsible to do something. And oftentimes, a lack of policy in your workplace or at your event can be the barrier here. If your supervisor, your manager, your team, your volunteer, supervisor hasn't told you that when we see things, we act on them, you may not feel as responsible as you ought to. The next thing that has to happen is we have to possess the skills. So this is another place where intervention can fall apart. So a lack of training will show up here. You may see it, you may recognize it as wrong, you may know that you feel responsible, but you may not have the skills to intervene. And then the last thing that has to happen is we have to be able to intervene safely. And in order to do that, we really need workplace or kind of team support. And those things show up here. So we can see that there's quite a few. There's several places where this could potentially go wrong. So what is the point of bystander intervention? This is where I'm saying it might not be what you think. Bystander intervention really is at its core, it's a harm reduction measure. You're trying to take the amount of potential harm that can come from a situation and do your best to reduce it or completely eliminate it. You're also trying to make your presence known to a person who's being targeted. We're really trying to build community capacity to challenge harassment. And it's really important to say that if what you've come across is a really highly escalated situation, in that moment, you're not going to be able to change anyone's mind and that they ought to, view the world differently. We need to be showing observers an alternative and focusing our resources on the target. In a highly escalated situation, if a lot of our resources are going to the person doing the attack, they might be in the wrong place. So bystander intervention is actually extremely methodical. It feels like something you might just jump in and do on a whim, jump into that river and save someone. But there's actually several steps. And before we get into any of the actual intervention, we need to talk about what I call pre-intervention checks. So our first one is that safety check. We're going to check our surroundings. We're going to scan our environment. For those of you who have first aid, you were very likely taught within that first 20 minutes of first aid that you don't jump in and start CPR if there is very grave and apparent risk to yourself, right? So the same kind of applies to bystander intervention. And I always recommend, especially in the work setting, do a bystander intervention in pairs if you can, even if the role of the other person is to stand down and observe from a distance. The next pre-intervention check is a permission check. And I recognize that in most cases, this isn't possible, but I like to teach you to always try and get permission to move forward with intervening. And having permission will influence which method you choose. So it may be, if you're witnessing an uncomfortable exchange and the perpetrator has their back to you, but you can make eye contact with the target, getting permission may look like a gesture like, "Are you okay? You want me to do something?" Another example I use here is a really common situation we get asked about is in the hospitality industry. And a lot of workplaces maybe have a delivery person who's not a direct member of the staff. They just deliver on Wednesdays, and they tend to, corner a server and keep them, they're very chatty with them, and it's a little bit uncomfortable. A way to do a permission check would be, if I'm on shift, kind of saying, "Ooh, I see we're getting a delivery today. If you kind of get wrapped into conversation with so and so, do you want me to come and remove you?" That's a permission check in advance. And then there's a gut check. And this is something that I encourage you to do, is just to really reflect on when you witness conflict or when you witness harassment, uh, what do you feel and where do you feel it? And I encourage you to do this because we all move through life with different experiences of trauma, of violence, of support networks, of, complex histories. And all of those things have wired our nervous response system in a very unique way. And so if you're a person who, when faced with conflict, you get the giggles, we have to work with that, not against it. Some people, when faced with conflict, they're ready to like flip a table. They go from 0 to 10 very quickly. That's really important to be aware of. Some people, when faced with conflict, they freeze, even knowing they don't really want to. That is their own body's wiring that is really determined to keep them safe. And so a person who freezes is probably never going to be able to be directly assertive. And that's okay. There's other ways to intervene. We don't want people to feel unsafe or feel that they failed because of this response that they have. And then the last pre-intervention check we need to do is what's called a bias check. And so I want to ask you folks, how might bias show up in our bystander intervention and actually maybe make it more harmful? Any guesses would be awesome. Yes. I see in the chat there's a couple of things around expected gender roles. Yep. The role that perhaps whiteness plays in intervention. Definitely. So many different maybe unchecked biases can show up here. If you maybe believe that sexual harassment can only be perpetrated against men towards women, you might totally miss a situation that doesn't look like that. With the example of racial bias, we know that men of color, particularly Black men, are some of the most over-surveyed and underprotected members of our society. People intervene, based purely off of bias and rather than a need to check in. And on the flip side of this, women of color, particularly Black women and Black trans women and Indigenous women, are some of the most underprotected members of our society. And as a society, we often actually turn away instead of intervening. So these are all things to think about. This is something that you do in the moment, but also commit to kind of that ongoing work of addressing how bias might be showing up in all of your interactions. So conveniently enough, these all start with a D. So our first one is detect. So again, I'm putting it back to you. What are we looking for? The first step to doing an intervention is recognizing that someone is maybe uncomfortable. So what are maybe some signs that someone might be uncomfortable? Yep, they are retreating. Yes, that's a great one, Dawn. Yep, quiet, head down. Short answers, body language. Yep, cringing, avoiding eye contact. Yep, outright crying. Definitely. Humans are pretty predictable in that when something is uncomfortable is happening around us, we tend to try to put a barrier between us and the uncomfortable things. So that barrier might be moving away, making yourself small, maybe like trying to look like you're on the phone, you're busy doing something. People's eye contact, it might be darting everywhere, looking for someone to help, or it may really be fixed on the ground. None of these are for sure, but they're all things that are kind of maybe worth paying attention to. Yes, I see a comment in the chat that, behavior that's maybe not normal for what you've seen of them before, as well as awkward laughing or outright signs of panic. My general rule of thumb here is if anything causes you to do a double take, it's worth paying attention to. If you walk past and you're like, did I see that right? That's worth following up. It could turn out being absolutely nothing, but if you have any reason for pause. Another note about detect is if you are at an event where you are, you have a large staff, you have volunteers, you have lots of ground to cover. Part of your training for your crew should be that everyone has a role to play in detection, right? I know when we get on site and we get really busy and wrapped up in all of the things that we have to do, it kind of gives us blinders. But I really encourage you to teach all of your team that absolutely everyone has a role to play in detecting when guests or patrons or coworkers are uncomfortable. For example, for festivals, green team, the environmental, team that cleans up the festival and has that really important job, they are really like some eyes and ears of the festival. If you are in a kind of space that serves liquor, the staff that go around and pick up the bottles and clear those out, they are the eyes and ears. They're moving around dance floors, they're moving around. So everyone has a role to play in detect. This was just a survey, or not a survey, but a research study that they went out to bars and live events and documented what people did when it looked like they were being harassed. And those evasive maneuvers that you all named was by far the most common answer, with it should show close to 60%. That was witnessed 60% of the time. And then this was followed by directly naming the harassment, followed by a very close margin by outright leaving the area or the bar, which is directly, not what we want to have happen. We don't want people to leave our events or quit jobs or leave job sites because they are feeling unsafe. So the first method I'm going to teach you is direct. And direct involves naming the behavior and ideally following that up with stating what you would want to have happen. Now, this is typically suited for people who are maybe close to the perpetrator, they know them in some capacity, or they have some degree of power within the space. So they're working, they're maybe a supervisor, they're a manager, they've in some way been entrusted with some authority. So for example, when I'm, at one of the festivals I work with as a staff member, I have a lot more authority invested to be direct than I do when I witness harassment, maybe on the bus between two people. If you have a code of conduct for your workplace or for your event, that really is your in. You're set up so well to be direct when you witness something, right? Because your code of conduct lists behaviors that aren't tolerated or will be addressed. And so you witness some of those behaviors, what you're witnessing is an opportunity to remind people of the code of conduct really easily. So I'm going to give you a perfect example of how this goes on. So if I witness something, it's very clear that it's harassment. I'm going to introduce myself. My name's Stacey. It's my job to make sure everyone has a really safe time and feels good here. What is your name? And if they're around a bunch of people, I might ask them to go for a little walk. So I'm not perhaps correcting their behavior in front of people that, may be more likely to escalate a defensive response. And then I'm just going to do a check-in. I recommend if you have a code of conduct at your event or in your workplace, you print it up on something much smaller, and all supervisors or all volunteers can have it in their work pack or their pockets and say, I know we haven't done an event in almost 2 years, and during that downtime, we made this code of conduct. I don't know if you had a chance to see it, or maybe if they're in a position where they've signed it, you say, I want to remind you that you've signed this code of conduct, and how I just witnessed you behaving isn't in line with that. So I'm going to give this to you. I'm going to ask you to review it. And if I see you doing that behavior again, you might be sent home for the day, or you might be asked to leave, or whatever the consequences are that are named in your code of conduct. A misconception about being direct is that it's confrontational. It is not always confrontational. It can be done out of respect. It can be done out of love. It can be done out of friendship. And really, it can be done to help keep an employee on your team, or working better, or to help a patron stay in the space. So it doesn't always mean inherently a conflict. The next method is de-escalate, and there's so many different ways to de-escalate, but really what they all have in common is an attempt to shift or interrupt a power dynamic at play. Because remember, all forms of harassment at the core are about a power dynamic that's being exploited. So de-escalate is trying to shift that with whatever tools we have that are relevant to our particular workspace. One of the easiest ways to de-escalate is to remove one of the people from that exchange, whether it's the perpetrator or whether it's the person being targeted. So, asking them to come help you find something. Hey, can you help me, come help me find whatever cables. I'm not a cable person, but I think there's a lot of people who are cable people here. I've looked everywhere in the truck. I cannot find them. I know they're supposed to be here, and I don't have much more time. Can you please come? And if you've removed the person you think is being targeted, you can follow that up with, I might be reading this wrong. I just got a sense that something uncomfortable was happening. Are you okay? Or if you've removed the perpetrator, you can follow it up with a discussion about their behavior. The person who's being targeted can carry on with their work or find their friends or whatever it is they were doing. A really common way to de-escalate that many people may have seen before is pretending you know one of the people. This is a bit more appropriate if you're in a social setting, if you're not at work. You're partaking in a festival instead of working one. But going up to someone, pretending you know one of them, I haven't seen you since the last Beast. I'd love to catch up with you. Do you want to come refill our water bottles and have a little chat? And they might say, what? I don't know you. No, thank you. Or they may take the carrot. If you offer this one up and they kind of give you a, what? I don't know you. I do want to mention that it might not be that you were reading it wrong. It could be that they think they're managing okay for the time being. And later on, they may not manage so well. And they may be like, I need an out here. Oh yeah, Stacy came and I'm, introduced herself. I'm going to take that carrot now. A great way to de-escalate could also be just introducing yourself to both people. In an exchange, if you're watching it, you're not too sure, it looks kind of weird. Hey, my name's Stacy. It's my job to make sure everyone is having an awesome time. Are you both okay? And if you're able to, you can make really intense eye contact with both of them. If you're pretty but not totally sure that one of them is making the other person uncomfortable, you can kind of double down on this one and say, okay, well, my name's Stacy. This is my section. I'm going to be here for the rest of the show. If you need anything, if anything makes you feel weird, I will be within earshot. I will be right here. And again, if you're able to, you follow it up with that eye contact. Let them know, like, I'm here. I'm watching you. I have your back. These are kind of really general ways to de-escalate a situation. I have a couple more on the next slide here. Using I statements is another great way. So maybe someone uses a word that we ought to not be using anymore. It is, an oppressive term. Instead of saying, hey, don't use that word, you could say, I'm feeling uncomfortable when I hear that term. Can we pick a new one? Another version of this is called forced teaming, where you're trying to get the person who's maybe making others feel uncomfortable through a joke or through language. Getting them to join your side and fostering unity with them by saying something like, we actually don't talk about women that way, or we don't talk to women that way. And the subtext of this one is, if you want to be a part of the we, you shift up your language. Step it down is a great one for those of you who are working at live music events. The principle of this one is rooted in nonviolent crisis intervention. And what this theory does is it poses that if you initially match the perpetrator's energy and then slowly bring it down to a place you want it to be, they very likely, but not all the time, will mirror you. And in my experience, I found this one works really well with people who are perhaps a bit intoxicated for whatever reason. So, security has them, they're not doing anything wrong, they're just kind of being a bit too rowdy and annoying. I initially am like, so they'll, get escorted maybe towards a team I'm working on by security, and they're loud. They're like, hey, what is this space? And they're like flailing their arms and they're yelling. I initially match that. Oh my goodness, I'm so happy you're here. And I'm also flailing. And then I'll be like, can we actually sit dance? And I'll get them to sit. And then I'll slowly stop gesturing and I'll bring my volume down slowly over the course of a conversation. And in my experience, brains that are a little bit intoxicated take to this one really well. And we can get them down to a volume and a state that's a little bit more manageable. Another way to de-escalate is just to make a choice to assertively ignore. If someone cracks a joke in the moment, don't give them a reaction. I definitely recommend following this one up with a conversation, but in the moment, you can de-escalate them and maybe prevent them from repeating it. A couple more here. Distract is very similar to de-escalate, but it's a little bit more silly. So if you are the person who has that nervous giggle reaction, this might be the one for you. Take the attention off of the target in whatever silly, funny way you can and put it on you. I did this workshop once for a high-end bar. And one of the bartenders, her method was when she was maybe witnessing what looked like a Tinder date that was getting a little bit uncomfortable at her bar, she would be like, Zen break. And she would slide down the bar with a mister of lavender to kind of just shift the energy. Again, for those of you who work in live music, the world is your oyster with this one. There's so many ridiculous things happening all the time. You could do a ridiculous dance. Definitely always follow this one up with something else, because that perpetrator is probably going to go bother someone else. But in the moment, you've taken, the heat off the person being targeted, and that is very important. Delegate is a great one. Delegate means seeing a situation, knowing someone has to do something, and knowing that person is not you for whatever reason. So you give that responsibility to someone else, whether it's security, whether it's your manager. If you have a really outgoing friend or coworker with you who is just so great with bystander intervention, tell them. In any setting where people are gathering, my favorite way to delegate is with the perpetrator's friend. This works really well for acts on the spectrum of misconduct that could still be corrected. Obviously, we wouldn't do this with someone who's like actively, intentionally, explicitly being violent. But if someone is in my space, they're a patron, they're generally a great group, but one of them is starting to really act up. Maybe that person who's acting up goes to the washroom. I say to the friends, like, I can see that you folks are having a blast here today. I want you to be able to keep this up. I want you to be able to enjoy this band and this event. We do need to talk about your friend, though. I'm not sure if you folks have seen the code of conduct. You did click on it to buy your ticket, but maybe you need a reminder. Can you help me rein in your friend? Because if they keep doing XYZ behavior, they will be asked to leave. So can we work together to help, wrangle them a little bit? Delegate is really asking, who around me can I bring into this? And so again, if you're conflict adverse, or you're busy, or you personally don't have the skills, or you're maybe on the end of a power dynamic that would make you unsafe to intervene, this one is for you. I know that with our street team, about 80% of their job at Good Night Out on the street team is bystander intervention. And so part of delegating and part of that safety check that we talked about earlier is, if they're witnessing a situation, they're pausing to observe, and they learn that the harassment they're witnessing has a homophobic tone to it, the queer folks on our team are not going to lead that intervention because it could potentially, be very unsafe for them. And so that is a part of delegate as well. Delay is the one for you. Again, if you have just listened to me list off these other methods and you're like, that's great, Stacey, but I am painfully shy, none of those will work for me. Delay means that you witness something, you don't do anything, no one does anything. Don't walk away yet. Check in with the person. Even if there's no more intervention to be had, go up to them, say, I saw what just happened. I am really sorry that no one did anything. I'm really sorry that I didn't do anything. How can I help you now? Are you okay? What would you like help with? Do you want to go get some air? Do you want to go get some water? Do you want to make a report to security? And what this can do is it can help ground them. It can help them feel seen. It can help them build resiliency, support, a sense of solidarity, especially if they are your coworker. From a patron perspective, this can help stop it from escalating, because if they're in a crowd and they look around and there's so many people around and they feel like no one did anything, this might spiral, right? Am I safe here? Should I leave? Is that person coming back? Why didn't these people do anything? Should I go get my friend of large physical stature to help enforce my safety, etc., etc.? This can help stop that cycle. This may be an opportunity to share resources. Any workplace or any live event should have an easily accessible PDF of resources. During festival season, I like to share that as an image on my phone. And if I witness someone being targeted, part of my delay check-in is, you might wake up or you might get home from the event or you might get home from work and feel really activated about this. May I email you or may I airdrop you a couple of resources I have handy? And then part of a delay is asking if there was a better way to support. And so I see your question, Carolyn. I'm tabling it for our little Q&A at the end. Thank you. Part of a delay is also just asking if there was a better way to support. So for example, I have friends and coworkers who often maybe are misgendered or people get their pronouns wrong. And so a delay could be, if we're going to this social event or we're working together and someone gets your pronouns wrong, how would you like me to support you? Do you want me to remind them? Do you want me to emphasize your pronouns? How can I support you if this happens again? And then the last D is actually 3-in-1: dialogue, document, debrief. As an event, you absolutely need to create a document of some form to track incidences and near misses around harassment. This helps you be able to do a risk assessment for your event, for your workplace, for your space, right? So if you just start tracking how many reports you got over the weekend of your festival or on set, and you kind of are looking at them and you can see like, ooh, I'm noticing a lot of these have a common thread of being, racially motivated harassment. We should bring in a training to boost up our skills in that. A lot of people are scared to document things like this, but the only way we can be accountable or know what our gaps are is by having them documented somewhere. For managers, for supervisors, if there is an incident, of any degree of seriousness, make time to debrief. Don't wait for your staff to ask for it. Don't wait for your staff to say, you know what, this really messed up thing happened. Can we talk about it? Automatically extend an invitation to unpack and provide supports in the post-harassment period. Keep talking about safety. Absolutely. I know occupational health and safety and all of those things is a common theme to this weekend. Every staff meeting, you should have at least 15 minutes to talk about conduct, to talk about safety. Your staff might use it. They might not. You get to maybe leave a little bit early. I recommend, before staff meetings, create either a virtual or a physical anonymous box where people can maybe drop things they want to talk about in the conduct area of your staff meeting, and not have their name attached to it. Here are some phrases to try that I will read out to you to help kind of form up the language. I'm feeling uncomfortable hearing you talk about people's bodies that way. Can we talk about something instead? Can we talk about how the Canucks absolutely annihilated Calgary yesterday? Another line could be talking about people's looks makes people feel uncomfortable. I really want all staff, especially new staff, to feel safe here. So I'm going to ask you to stop. The next one I already used, the one you can use with a group. Hey, we are aware it can make people feel weird to have strangers talking about their appearance, so we make it a habit not to do that here. Our code of conduct is in place to help make sure everyone feels comfortable here. And what you just said isn't really in line with that. Can we have a little chat? And then the last one I've used already. I saw what just happened and I'm so sorry. No one, including myself, spoke up. But how can I help you now? This is a ladder of misconsent. I'm going to try to summarize this in 2 minutes so that we have ample time for questions. What this is showing, this is from our friends at Dandelion, which is a similar organization out east. Their work has kind of shown that people who are perpetrators in a space, not all of them, but a lot of them tend to follow a very predictable chain of behavior. And this ties in with a really common question Good Night Out gets asked of like, how can I intervene on a situation before it escalates? Recognizing this ladder of misconsent is an important tool in intervening before things ramp up. So many people who are kind of problems in our workplace or at our events, they walk into a space and from the moment they walk in, they're taking up a lot of space. They're trying to exert their power. They're yelling. They plunk their stuff everywhere. They're like, hey, what's going on? Can I get a drink? What are you doing? They're making demands. There is an opportunity to check that behavior, but no one does because they actually haven't done anything wrong yet. And then, you know, if they say, if we're in a kind of bar setting or where liquor is served, they say, hey, can you get these people a round of drinks and these people a round of drinks? And the bartender does, they don't really think about it. There then can sometimes be an element of you owe me, like, what? I bought you drinks. The least you can do is talk to me. And the people, this is often where they exert a boundary, like, hey, we actually have some business to discuss. We don't have time to talk to you, but thank you. This is where they set up a barrier. We may then see bargaining or outright more aggressive attacks. So like, what? I'm a nice person. I come here all the time. Tell them I'm a nice person. And then when another boundary is exerted, we often find that this is met with like, what? You're ugly. What? I didn't do anything wrong. If we rewind that scenario, we could have exerted a little bit of a boundary from the moment they walked in and they were yelling. So maybe they walk in to the workplace, hey, what's going on? You're yelling, making people feel uncomfortable. Ooh, Dawn, can we use our indoor voice? I'm a little bit hungover today. You know, gentle assertion as opposed to a correction. Maybe they make a demand like, hey, can I get a drink and drinks for them? Actually, we have a policy that people have to consent to all drinks. So I can't send them a drink without them consenting. These are small gestures that can actually prevent situations from escalating. Some do's and don'ts, and then we'll move on to questions. Some do's, try to move yourself and the person being harassed to a safer space as best you can. It could be like, do you want to walk and talk with me? Do make your presence to the target known, whether that's through eye contact or getting, you know, a little bit closer to them. If it's safe for you, obviously, if it's an aggressive or violent assault, this wouldn't be a tool to use. But if you're able to and it's safe, is it possible for you to create a barrier between yourself and the person doing the harassing? Another do I really want to remind you of is take cues from the person being harassed. Are they engaging? Are they talking? Are they taking your suggestions? If you say, would you like to walk with me over here? Would you like this person to leave you alone? And they don't engage with you, follow their lead. Honoring people's autonomy, even if it's doing something that we personally wouldn't do, to some degree is really, really important. And we want to try to honor that unless it poses grave risk to lots of people in the space. Some reminders about what to avoid. We want to avoid just having our default response be calling the police. As a first line of protection. We have to remember that many communities experiencing harassment right now, or kind of generally in our society, the police can actually cause a greater danger to them. And so this is why training in diffusion and de-escalation is so important. A big role of harm reduction or sanctuary spaces at festivals is to kind of diffuse things so that we don't have to rely on security or external resources from the community. With bystander intervention, we always want to do our best not to escalate the situation, right? A goal is to get the person being targeted to safety, not to incite further violence. And so sometimes where things escalate is us in a moment trying to rationally argue with the person doing the harassing. In those situations, it's too late. It's too late. We're not going to convince anyone who is, inflicting racial, homophobic, gender-based violence on someone in public that they ought to be a better person. There is room for that work, but it is not in that moment. And if we're devoting our resources there, not only are we risking escalating, we are ignoring the target, which may not be the best use of our resources. And we want to avoid doing nothing. Silence is dangerous. It communicates approval. It leaves targets high and dry. If you find yourself too nervous, too afraid to speak out, this is why working in pairs is good. You can just move yourself closer to the person, communicate that you're there, and maybe someone else can go and delegate and get help. This is where we open it up for some questions. I did see Carolyn's question around what type of resources do you have on hand? It does, of course, depend on your specific workplace. There are a few I will share at the very end, but my advice is a general kind of mental health crisis line, a general sexual violence line. Obviously, WorkSafe resources or the WorkSafe line would be helpful here. Maybe some supports for LGBTQ workers, and then anything you have if you are a workplace that has an employee and family assistance program, all of those numbers. You want it all to fit on a page. Some additional resources might be free or low-cost counseling. Culturally specific resources are really important to include on this kind of sheet. And then maybe just websites around mental health or to learn more. Like I said, I'm going to share a few more in a couple of slides. Any other questions from the group? I'm just going to check the Q&A tab here. Yeah, things you can do when you don't feel safe intervening, but you don't want to leave them alone. That's a really good one. For here is there's a few things, and of course it depends on the situation. One potentially could be obviously just communicating that you're here. So walking, if they're in motion, walking, observing from a distance, remembering that in many cases you might not be safe to intervene, but documenting everything that's happening, either by paying attention, locking in your head a description of the perpetrator, making note of what street and what direction, or outright filming could be very powerful. We, of course, want to be mindful of what we do with filming after we film an incident. But think of the power that the teenage girl who filmed George Floyd's murder, that was a very valuable, that young woman was not ever able to act beyond the detect stage, but her skills in detecting and documenting became so important. Another bit of advice is, if you're working alone and you're witnessing something and you can't intervene, are you able to stay with them, but maybe text a manager or, again, your coworker or friend who's really good at intervention to come and be a second party in this to troubleshoot it with you? Yeah, this is something our street team encounters a lot, and a lot of their work is monitoring from a distance until there is an opportunity to delegate, hand off, or act up. But that making your presence known is extremely important. And again, it's situation specific, but there may be opportunity to say, to go up and approach both of them generally. Be like, hey, you could either pull this as a distract to get a better feel of the situation. Like, hey, do you know where this venue is? I've heard it's down here, to maybe glean a little bit more insight. Or go up to them and be like, hey, are you both okay? Do you both need anything? Water? Are you good? Like, can I support both of you? And kind of the response you get could give you a little more insight about how dire or urgent the situation is. Switching back to the chat because I can see that there are a couple of things. What about interventions idea when the environment is quieter? Yeah, for sure. I think that the anything you can do to remove maybe the person you think is being targeted could be helpful here. So an example that comes to mind immediately is, it's a little bit more for a service environment, but you might be able to adapt it, is maybe you see a table, there's an exchange going on at the table between two people, and you're fairly certain that one of them is unsafe or potentially unsafe, is saying to the person you think is being targeted, I need to actually run your card again for your tab. Can you come up? My machine is being really goofy. Can we try this machine on the other end of the bar? And then you get them over there and you say, you know, I could be reading this wrong and I completely apologize, but I just wanted to make sure you were okay. And kind of do that check-in. You might have this opportunity when one of them maybe goes to go to the washroom or leaves for another reason. That may be a tool there as well. And yeah, as Dawn said, if there isn't an opportunity or they decline, definitely, it doesn't mean like, okay, sweet, back to work I go. Do either stay in the area or delegate, you know, can you keep an eye on this situation here? Nothing's happened yet, but I just have a feeling. A big part of bystander intervention is paying attention to your gut. It's not always right. It's definitely wrong a lot, but it's worth paying attention to. Yes, this is a great question. Is there an option for an in-person training? Do keep putting your questions in the chat. I'm going to advance my slides because the answer to a couple of questions is in the next couple of slides. Remember, there's no one size fits all. The fun almost element of bystander intervention is picking and choosing different methods for different situations and also making it your own. For example, I'm a very awkward person, so I use that to my advantage to, you know, make people stare and focus at me instead of the person being targeted. Oops. We've already covered it's methodical. I hope you see that by now. It's not something done on a whim. Many interventions require doing more than one thing. So to answer the question in the Q&A, all of our workshops are free. This includes an at-length deep dive into bystander intervention that will be tweaked for your workplace. So from an event perspective, from a concert perspective, we can come in and offer you a full workshop on that. We can also help with policy and all of that. And the best way to find that is through our website. We also are in the spring doing a series of deep dive bystander interventions. So you can sign up for that, or you can check our website to book one specifically for your workplace. The ones we are doing in the spring are like for the public. If you want one customized for your workplace, the link is now in the chat. And we can definitely do that. And then here are my kind of go-to resources. There's a camera, a photo of a camera on that slide as a cue to screenshot. So those are kind of some basic general support resources that are a good place to start there. This is how you can stay in touch with us. Our website, our email, our social handles are all there. We are most active on Twitter and Instagram. So please do stay in touch and reach out if you feel that your workplace would benefit from a training like this. I do see there's something else in the Q&A, so I'm going to switch over to a group of people. Oh, yeah. This is such a great question, especially for the music setting. I feel with like diffusing situations with groups, comedy is your friend here, or that kind of distraction approach, because you want to try to avoid a mob mentality. So if you're able to use a diffuse with that situation, that's kind of my go-to with groups, is like get that group focused on you. Honestly, in like, I'm going to use an example from our street team. Our street team carries backpacks. Like, yes, they have practical things like first aid kit and snacks and water, but they also have a lot of candy and food and fun things. Because if you go up to a group of people and you're like, hey, do you want free candy? Do you want free food? Most of the time, the answer is yes. Of course, we're using individually wrapped items in the time of COVID, but can you diffuse that by like giving people something? So this is obviously a more formal approach for like a workplace or an event. You can't really be on the bus and be like, hey, want some candy from my backpack? But at your event, having something to give away can kind of break that energy up. Definitely recommend you follow up with like security or supervisor to be like, this group of people, I do believe, is making people feel unsafe. And remember, if you think it's a situation more suited to being direct, there may be circumstances where we're approaching that group as a group and being like, hey, like, you are clearly having fun here. I love that you are at our event. I want you to stay here. We want to give you a gentle reminder to be a little bit more self-aware. Like, here's our code of conduct. I'm not trying to narc you out. I'm not trying to, be the fun police, but I want everyone to feel unsafe. And I'm worried that people might be, starting to feel uncomfortable by how you're acting. So there is a way to be direct, but combine it with like a warm, humanizing, gentle approach that isn't from the get-go. I do want to give a shout out if any of your events use guard tech. The guard tech team is so good at this approach with groups. They're really informed by just a really sensitive, they're authoritarian when they need to be, but they are also very sensitive and really good at this approach.
I had a quick question for you, Stacey, actually,
Yeah.
because we're getting asked more and more questions around this, and
Yeah.
and you and I will talk about how we weave your stuff into our programming, because I think that would be really fun. One of the things I struggle with, and because we like to do a lot of practical training, hands-on kind of stuff, talks, and actually doing things, role playing, and actually scenario-based training. Do you guys use it as part of your training? And one of the things I've had to happen a couple of times is that it can actually trigger people. And I'm pretty good at laying out the training and doing stuff, but I do struggle with, I don't want to upset people in that when doing it. Advice, thoughts?
Yeah. Well, that's such a great question, Dawn. And I'm so glad you're thinking with like a survivor informed lens. There's a few different answers to your question. You are right. Those kind of go-to case studies have a huge potential. We have to remember that 1 in 4 people in any given space have lived experience with forms of violence. So if we are doing a case, we have to recognize that a huge part of our group has probably had something happen to them. And so I do not use case studies generally, especially on Zoom. Zoom is we're doing virtual workshops right now, and I don't think it's a safe place to really support people in the way that they need. If I am in a situation where I'm using case studies, I tend to keep it a general form of harassment rather than diving deep into a traumatic, perhaps gender-based violence scenario. In my agenda, I might give people lots of notice that we're going to use them. And maybe if you're able to have a few facilitators, people who want to do case studies, come in this room. People who don't, let's do a different breakout room so people can opt out of it if they want. But currently, Good Night Out, we, in our information resources we give you after a training, we give you some case studies so that you can kind of choose to use them, run through them with your team if you want to, or those who want to participate. A really important part of being trauma informed is giving potential people with lived experience of harassment and violence the choice to opt out.
100%. That's great advice. Thank you. I think we're down to our last minute.
Yeah. I came in like with a minute to spare, which is sometimes hard in these settings. An hour is not long enough. This is why it had the name The Basics. I know a lot of you have really specific questions to your industry. And our training is all free right now. So if you want to get specific, please book us. Yeah.
We absolutely love all of your work. Thank you so much for joining us again. And I'm looking forward to finding another way for us to do this with our group, because I think there's a lot of really good people here that would love to spend some more time with you, Stacey. This has been fabulous. As always, thank you for joining us. I just wanted to give another shout out to UBCP ACTRA for sponsoring the session. And a general reminder, there was a link put into the Twitter feed for Good Night Out. Follow them. If you ever get a chance to see them on the mall, it's absolutely amazing to watch their teamwork. It is flabbergasting. I've seen it a few times. And last but not least, don't forget, we have bingo coming up later this afternoon. So please join us, because again, I'll say it, the prizes are insane. Thanks so much, Stacey. I look forward to talking to you soon. And come back anytime.
Thank you.
And now we just get to chat amongst ourselves. Talk amongst yourselves.
Awesome.
Oh, yeah, bingo cards. I remember to let people know.
That's a fun addition.
It is fun. Feel free to join us. You got a code to get in? Come on and play.
Yay, fun.
Thank you. I'm going to end the presentation now, and then we'll go back to our tables, and we'll be back here for Steve's session next. Thank you.
Thanks, Sam.